Good morning. Today is the 30th day of Nisan, the last day of Nisan. It's also the first day of the month of Iyar, or at least the first day of Rosh Chodesh. And we're learning the sixth reading of the joint Parshas Tazria and Metzorah together. Let's see, there are two topics in today's reading. The one topic is the leprosy of the house, which gives us a very strong hint that this is not exactly a regular disease, since houses don't get sick with human diseases. And here we have a house that suddenly has this. It's worthwhile to note that in the Talmud it says there was never such a house, ever. That's one opinion. Another opinion is that there was such a house, and somebody once sat on its rubble. If there was no such house, why does the Torah talk about this? There's an interesting principle, which is that not everything that the Torah talks about actually becomes part of reality. And so the sage who brings this opinion says that it was meant to just be learned. Meaning you should just learn this, and you get the reward for learning the topic, but not necessarily that this can actually manifest itself in our reality. Okay, so let's say a few things about what does it even mean that a house would get leprosy? Like, what exactly does this look like? So I'll just read a few verses. God spoke to Moses and Aaron. Originally, I wanted to speak about why he says this both to Moses and Aaron together. To say to the Israelites, when you enter Canaan, which I am giving you as a possession. In other words, this can also only happen in the land of Israel. This can't happen anywhere else. I may place a tzara'at, a lesion, upon a house in the land of your possession. And then the owner of the house must come out and tell the priest, saying, something resembling a lesion has appeared on my house. The priest must order that the house be cleared out before he comes to examine the lesion, so that everything in the house not become ritually defiled. There's a very interesting lesson here that Rashi notes that really the only thing that could be defiled in this case would have been clay or earthenware. And even though these are the cheapest of materials and they can easily be reused because you break them apart and you make them into clay again and you can refashion them, and it's a simple process, the Torah is very careful to not waste anything. So if this can be saved, if this vessel can be saved from becoming defiled and needing to be broken and taken through this whole process of being reformed, so the Torah does that. And so he was commanded to take everything out of the house so that nothing become ritually defiled. Again, there's a reason why it's just in the end the earthenware. Everything else can easily be purified. After this, the priest must come to examine the house. He must examine the lesion. If the lesion on the walls of the house appears pure green or pure red, sunken-looking stains, appearing to be deeper than the wall, then the priest must go out of the house to the entrance of the house, and he must quarantine the house for 7 days. Then the priest must return the seventh day and examine the house. If the lesion has disappeared or turned a lighter or darker shade of red or green, the affected area must be scraped, and the priest must then pronounce the house rid of this defilement. If, however, the lesion is spread on the walls of the house must be purged as follows. The priest must order that the stones upon which the lesion is found be removed, and those who remove them must dispose of them outside the city to a designated place that becomes defiled. In addition, the workers must scrape out the house from the inside, all around the vicinity of the removed stones. They must pour out the mortar, dust that they removed, and the dust that they removed outside the city into a defiled place. And then there's a whole process of finally coming after the second week and announcing that the house has now been purified. Then the purification follows, and we're going to discuss this, almost the same process as when one purifies a human who has contracted this illness called tzara'at, leprosy. To ritually, I'm skipping to verse 49, to ritually purify the house, you must take the same items as must a person being purified from tzara'at: 2 fowl, meaning 2 birds, a cedar stick, a strip of scarlet wool, and some hyssop. The the cedar stick and hyssop must be bound together using the strip of scarlet wool. And he slaughters one of the birds into an earthenware vessel, and so on. And it's almost the same process. Now, so let's recap everything we've seen in this parsha. We've seen that there is tzara'at in the person himself. We've seen that there's tzara'at of garments. Garments can also have these lesions. And finally, there is the tzara'at, the same illness, in houses. So what are these? These are the three most important categories that Chassidus discusses regarding the life of every person. Every person requires what we call food, clothing, and shelter. Food, clothing, and shelter, in Hebrew, mazon levush bait. The food becomes part of us. We need the food in order to sustain our physical being. So the food is what we call internal. We internalize it, we make it part of us. The clothing is the first covering that we have. It's a covering that takes on the same shape as we do. And the second covering is our shelter, our house, where we live. Now this corresponds to the 5 levels of the soul. How does this correspond? That the first 3 levels, what we call nefesh, ruach, neshama, the psyche, the spirit, and the soul, they dwell within the body itself. These are the 3 lower levels. They are within the body itself. Then we have the 4th level, which is called the chaya, which is the living one. And it's called a surrounding light. It surrounds us. But this light is very much attached, as a word, to the body. It's very close. It's not inside the body, it's outside, but it's very attached. It's like a garment that we wear. It's like something, and a lot of people say that they see this thing, whether they do or they don't, they call it an aura. I don't know. Finally, the 5th level is what we call the far or the distant surrounding light, or the yechida, the singular one. And that corresponds to our house. And it's a very interesting thing that when it comes to our house, we have a statement from Rabbi Yochanan in the Talmud who says, I never called my wife, I called her my house. Why does he call her his wife, his house? So here we have this very interesting parallel, that the purification of the house is like the purification of the human. The purification of clothing is very simple. It's just put into a mikveh. That's all that's done with it. It doesn't need the whole ritual of taking the 2 birds and the hyssop and the cedar and the string of wool, and so it doesn't need all that. But the house does. There's a statement also in English that people say, my house is my castle. What they mean to say is that a person is more reflected in his house than he is in his clothing. It seems to us that because the clothing is very similar to the body, it shapes around the body in a close fashion, it seems to us that it is more similar to who we are. It more represents who we are. But in truth, it's actually the house, the farther distant light, that reflects who we are in our essence more than our clothing. Now, what do we get from this? We get from this something very interesting. That when we come, for instance, to ask, where do we meet God Himself? Where do we meet God Himself? Is it in the garments? What are the garments that we wear from God? These are the commandments. Or in God's house? So it says here, it's the same thing, that God's house more reflects Him, even though, again, it's not in His shape at all. When we say that we wear the garments of the mitzvot, when we do a mitzvah, we wear something that's very close to us. In other words, when we put our tefillin on, it's exactly on our hand. We put our talis on, it's on our body. It takes the shape of our body. When we take a lulav and a netrok, it's in our hand, and it's shaped like us. Everything is very close. But the house of Hashem, whether it be a shul, now in our generations when we don't have the temple, or the temple itself, actually, even though it's less, it seems dissimilar. It's not like God. It's something, it's a completely different. Why would a building reflect the essence? And yet the building is where we meet the very essence of God. It's where we meet the very essence of God, even in this generation when we go to pray in a shul, in a synagogue, in whatever house we designate as a house of God. In the same way that the Yechida, that the singular one of the soul, most reflects the very essence of who we are. So this is an incredible idea about the importance of upholding houses of prayer, the importance of upholding yeshivot, where not just where we go to pray, but where we also study. It's also a type of house of God. It says that in the future, all these shuls, all these synagogues, all these houses of learning will all spiritually be taken, as it were, just lifted up and become part of the Beit HaMikdash, part of the temple in Jerusalem. So may we merit to see this quickly in our time, and in the meantime, uphold and strengthen every single shul that we're at, and make sure that they are more beautiful than our own homes, and that we come together there like the Rebbe very much wanted in this year, the year after the sabbatical, the Shemitah, to come together to see each other, to meet each other. That is the greatest pleasure that Hashem has, when His children come together to speak together and to enjoy each other's company, to strengthen one another and to care for one another. So I wish everyone a good Shabbos and hope to see you next week.